Tonight on Land Speculation, it is Bible Stream Part 5. After a bit of a hiatus, we're going to pick up with Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or as much of it as we can get through. And we're going to talk about the Israelites wandering through the desert for 40 years and the emergence of Israelite society, the many rules and regulations and punishments that God bestows upon the Israelites as he sets the stage for the emergence from the desert at the end of the Pentateuch. Tonight on Land Speculation.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
This is Land Speculation. Something we do with Kinky.
Quack, 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 quack.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
Honk, 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 honk.
Give us your money.
That would be weird.
Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha.
Let's see.
I eat bars of soap for breakfast. I love bars of soap. After midnight, things get weird.
Quack, quack.
Oh no.
Let it go. Let it go.
Cock.
I like that one.
Quack, 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 quack. Come on, ducks.
And welcome, guys, to Land Speculation on YouTube, where tonight we are, as aforestated, doing Bible Stream Part 5. It has been a little bit since we did our last installation of the Bible Stream, but I have gotten a lot of requests for this next installation. Apparently people have enjoyed listening to these as a sort of ASMR after the fact, and so if you're listening to us after the fact, let me know. Anyway, we got some folks here in the chat. Jeanette, Skitty Squirrel, Jay Luther are with us here out of the gate, as well as Spyman. So medals for everyone who's here out of the gate so far. And to the legions listening around the world. We're going to dig into some pretty interesting stuff tonight. I forgot I needed to have a second computer up when we do these Bible streams, because I got to juggle a lot of competing information when we do them. And now I gotta juggle moving the microphone closer to, apparently, because I'm apparently very soft. So we're gonna try to speak up here and dig into the Bible stream. I've got like more things I'm trying to juggle on a single table than I can shake a stick at. Anyway, it is Bible Stream Part 5. and we're going to dig into some new material here and hopefully move along and pick up the pace. We spent a lot of time earlier on digging through some background on the Bible as well as the full stories of Genesis and Exodus, which are very jam-packed components of, the beginning of the Bible. And we cover thousands of years in the first 2 chapters of the whole thing. And so now we're going to dig a little bit into the genesis of Israeli society as they wander the desert. Now that they've left Egypt and are not yet in the promised land. So there's some work to do on ancient Israelite society before we get there. And so this is where the Bible really digs into the evolution of early society in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So very interesting stuff in the Bible at this juncture. And I don't know, it's a very interesting part of the whole thing. So let's start, though, because it's been a couple of weeks. We'll do a little bit of a just sort of rehashing of kind of where we came from in talking about this remarkable book, the Bible, one of the most jam-packed books in all of human history, and to many, the inspired Word of God that, at least allegorically, tells the entire history of essentially how the world came into being, how we established modern society, and how God established a relationship with the remarkable creatures he created, human beings, with dominion over the earth. The Bible, of course, 66 books. Now, it depends which version of the Bible you are reading, but the Bible generally, at least the sort of traditional Protestant version of the Bible, 66 books. The Old Testament, the longer Testament, the Testament before Jesus is born, is the Testament that tells the whole history from the beginning of time, when God creates the heavens and the earth in Genesis, all the way through the long history of the Israelites across 12 books in the Old Testament. Some of the sayings, proverbs, important messaging that carry the Israelites through the dark days of wandering through the wilderness, and then the words of many prophets, which set the stage for the emergence of a Savior that would transcend time, the arrival of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, the Gospels, and then the many letters that basically spread the word of Jesus to, communities and soon-to-be followers around the world. So we did a little bit of outlining of the entire Bible, talking about the history, the organization, why it includes what it includes, and then a little bit of the historical significance of why this collection of stories became so impactful and so influential when they did. Really remarkable confluence of circumstances that led to the sort of transcendence of the tribe of Israel, and then the rise of this this figure, Jesus Christ, who became one of the most impactful and influential people. I mean, probably the most impactful, influential person in all of human history. So, if you missed our early Bible streams, and you want to sort of start with an overview of the entire ball of wax, our first Bible stream basically is stage setting on the entire Bible. Of course, once we did that, we delved into the first 2 books of the Bible, the book of Genesis, which of course is a really, really significant book, probably the most significant book maybe in the entire Bible. Certainly when people talk about their favorite books in the Bible, the greatest preponderance of impactful stories, probably, maybe with the exception of the Gospels, but probably even including the Gospels, is the book of Genesis, because the book of Genesis tells the story of creation. It tells the story of how the earth was made in 7 days. It tells the story of Adam and Eve and how God began to establish a relationship with human beings. It tells the story of the fall and the sort of man's first sin, and the beginning of essentially a flawed, our sort of flawed nature as human beings. It tells the story, of course, of Cain and Abel. It tells the story of Noah and the flood, and this really complex set of conditions in which God and humanity are sort of feeling each other out in the early part of the Bible. What's the relationship going to be? When man sins, what's the right response? What's the right punishment? We hear the story of the Tower of Babel over and over and over again. God creates human beings and expects the best from them, and then with free will, we go ahead and we sin anyway, and then God punishes us. The story of Genesis. Of course, we, from Genesis, started following the origins of what ultimately become the tribe of Israel, starting with the kind of human factor here, this figure Abraham, who basically becomes the forefather of a great many leaders over the ensuing several hundred years, and their journeys back and forth across Egypt, Canaan, Mesopotamia, everywhere in between, this part of the world that actually is geographically quite small, but which in ancient days was a very, very, very impactful part of the world. We learned, of course, about how God establishes a covenant with Abraham and his sons. In Genesis, we learned about Sodom and Gomorrah. We learned about Abraham and Isaac. We learned about Jacob and Esau. And we learned about Joseph in Egypt, as eventually the Israelites end up in Egypt and they end up enslaved. And the book of Genesis closes out, having started with this grand story of the creation of everything, with this desperate situation in which the tribe of Abraham is enslaved in Egypt, which sets the stage, of course, for the great Exodus in the second book of the Bible. And we tackled on earlier Bible streams the story of the book of Exodus, the story of deliverance through Moses, this titanic figure in the Bible who rises to prominence, who punishes Pharaoh through the 10 plagues, in this earnest plea to let the Israelites go from Egypt, and eventually the transcendent delivery by way of the Passover that finally convinces Pharaoh to let the Israelites go before he changes his mind and chases them across the Red Sea, which God parts on behalf of Moses and the Israelites. And their emergence after all of this enslavement, all of the trouble escaping, right back on into the desert, which is a little bit of a letdown, you would think. You know, you thought you were headed to the promised land, but no, you're headed into the desert, and in the desert, a period of tremendous learning, rule setting, and societal formation. The book of Exodus, God establishes the 10 Commandments, but really the 10 Commandments are a little bit of just an appetite whetter for some of the many, 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 many ways in which God establishes rules and policies and sort of societal constraints, which I guess through the next several books of the Bible, God paints a picture of, and I guess is doing some stage setting to try to prepare the Israelites for their ultimate delivery to the promised land, their sort of maturation as a tribe, ultimately to their emergence into a kingdom. But that takes several hundred years to develop. So these final 3 books of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, are what we're going to try to dig into tonight as best we can. The books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We're going to hit them a little bit quicker than our deep dives into Genesis and Exodus, and we're going to talk about the many, 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 sometimes crazy, sometimes seemingly inexplicable, but usually explicable rules and protocols and such that God lays down as as the journey of the Israelites, it's sort of stalled here for a bit. But these are important books anyway. And so this is where we're headed tonight on Land Speculation on YouTube. So if you wouldn't mind out of the gate here dropping a like and a subscribe on the video, I appreciate that. Those likes help us out with YouTube. The subscribes help you guys know when we're on. As always, check our description for links to our Discord and our Duck Fund. So the Discord, of course, we have a religion channel if you want to talk about everything that transpires on these Bible streams or in the Bible generally. The religion channel has been set up on the Discord for people to be able to do that. And of course, the Duck Fund, that's our PayPal link if people want to support the stream. We always appreciate the contributions there. Now, based on the numbers, I'm assuming that maybe a notification has not... YouTube's sometimes a little finicky with the notifications, so hopefully people will be joining us here as we kind of get out of the gate. But anyway, highs and hellos here in the chat. Yeah, time for dark chocolate and peanut butter, says Jay Luther. Jen says, this always amazes me, thousands of years in the first few chapters of the Bible. Yeah. I mean, the way the amount of stuff the Bible packs into Genesis is really quite remarkable. And of course, Exodus is a long story as well. So there is, I guess there's sort of a timeline that we are kind of working within here as we go through these books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These are the basic timeline, at least sort of history where we are right now. Of course, let me see if I have the longer timeline somewhere in here. Okay, well, this is a little bit longer, but I think I have an even longer timeline somewhere. If I scroll back far enough through the content that we put together for the first few streams, I have a running slideshow of all this content that is, as you can imagine, many hundreds of slides long. So yeah, there's this timeline that basically starts like at the very beginning of time, which is, of course, a long time ago, and that depends really how you decide to parse that. 4,000, 6,000, 10,000, maybe millions of years ago, when essentially God establishes the heavens and the earth. And, I think generally, we're inclined to believe that the first half of Genesis, up until the call of Abraham, is essentially allegorical. So everything that happens before the year 2000 BC. So we're talking the creation story, we're talking Noah's flood, we're talking Cain and Abel, of course Adam and Eve, the Tower of Babel. But these are all sort of allegorical stories. And they are intermingled with a number of genealogies. And so if you go to the Creation Museum, for instance, there's a lot of effort there to try to parse exactly how old are these stories that the Bible is describing, if you are to take them literally. But I guess we're inclined to believe that the part of the Bible that really becomes kind of a historical tale starts around 2000 BC with the call of Abraham. And there's this whole sequence that happens, of course, in the back half of Genesis, and then, of course, through Exodus, where they're kind of going back and forth between like into and out of Egypt. There's the birth of Isaac, the birth of Jacob, Jacob's journey, and then I guess the Israelites get enslaved in Egypt by around the year 1600 BC. So that's basically where Genesis ends, around the year 1600 BC. Exodus slows down a little bit. The story of Exodus essentially takes us from approximately 1600 BC, when the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, until they end up wandering the desert, starting in about the year 1446. And that is when we think approximately the 10 Commandments are issued. That's when the beginning of all this kind of rule setting initiates. And so after like thousands and thousands of years in Genesis, Exodus covers, about 150 years. And then these next three books, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all together basically just talk about this period of the wilderness wanderings between 1446 and 1406 BC, the famous 40 years of wandering through the desert. So time is slowing down. The Bible, we talked about this in the initial stage setting scene. The Bible is sort of an interesting progression. We start kind of in the beginning of time. The Old Testament through its 17 books of history out of the gate, the Pentateuch, and then the 12 histories of Israel after the death of Moses, basically goes up until about the year 500 BC. And then the Bible really doesn't talk a lot about what happens between the year 500 BC and when Jesus is born, approximately the year 0. And then, of course, there's a lot of focus in the New Testament on the 33 or so years that Jesus was alive, and then the ensuing years when the messaging of Jesus was spread. So the Bible, while it is a history that basically traces to the beginning of time, it is not a completely exhaustive history. And it does tend to dwell in some of these years that become really important. And this 40-year sequence in which the Israelites are wandering the desert is a very important period within the biblical narrative. So, again, this is kind of what we're going to go through here tonight. Some of this is, these books get a little drier. These are different, and we're going to have to tackle them differently, because these aren't like grand historical narratives nearly as much as Genesis and Exodus are. These are also very long books. Genesis and Exodus are they're 2 of the 4 longest books in the Bible. Now, depending which version you're reading, they're around 32,000, 31,000 words, respectively. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, again, the 3 books here that conclude the Pentateuch, are a little bit shorter, but still very long books. All 3 of them together, 72,000 words, which is a lot of words. And again, most of those words are essentially like rule setting. We have a little bit of storytelling. Most of that storytelling happens in the book of Numbers and a little bit in the book of Deuteronomy. But these books get pretty darn intense. This is like a very serious version of God. This is still the God of the early Old Testament that is very vengeful. This is a God that is jealous at times. This is a God that is highly punitive for transgressions and who is starting to establish covenants and testing the Israelites. There's kind of a version of God here that's, he's constantly doing this thing where he's like, here's a law, I dare you to break it. And then somebody breaks it, and then God has to figure out a punishment. And sometimes the punishment feels outsized. So we're going to dig into sort of all of what that means. I will say, Genesis and Exodus are among the very highest rated books in the Bible. And if you've watched any of our previous Bible streams, you know that we have this proprietary methodology that we've developed in which we've scanned the internet and basically developed a rating score that people place on essentially like how meaningful, how impactful, how much they like the different books of the Bible. Genesis and Exodus as a pair of books are basically the highest rated books in the entire Bible as a set, with a 0.94 average. Leviticus to Deuteronomy, these 3 books that follow it, are among the very lowest rated books of the Bible to the people that read them. These books are a 0.36. I think there are a number of reasons for that, one of which is that they aren't as compelling of a story, perhaps. Part of it's that this is a version of God that to Christians who kind of mostly think of God in the New Testament context, there's a lot of God in Leviticus to Deuteronomy that feels somewhat foreign, much maybe meaner, much more inexplicable, certainly a God that is very interested in some things that kind of seem like minutia in a contemporary context. And there's a lot of stuff in Leviticus, particularly Leviticus, but also Numbers and Deuteronomy, that in a contemporary context, critics of the Bible would look at and say, wow, the Bible was kind of getting it wrong on some of its ethics. But we'll talk specifically about some of those things as we dig in here. So lots and lots of rules, and in covenant setting, let's say. And again, a lot of this has to do with basically the creation of society here. You have a bunch of Israelites. They're now wandering the desert. And as you can imagine, people are wandering the desert and they're tired and they're hungry and they thought they were going to go to the promised land. And as it turns out, there's no promised land to be had, at least not yet. There's going to be some grumbling. And so this is the context. Imagine hot people stranded in the desert, not really knowing quite what to do or whether they should have this complete and unwavering faith in Moses and in God. We already talked a little bit about when they laid out the Ten Commandments. People are like, Moses goes away for a couple days, and all of a sudden people start worshiping these golden calves. So there's a little bit of tension in the desert here as we begin the book of Leviticus. Okay, we got a few other folks here in the chat. Call me the Chaos, I'm Lurking, have joined us. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with us here as we are tackling Bible Stream Part 5 tonight. We appreciate everyone who's here. Okay, by the way, we are drinking fizzy water tonight. This is Polar, 100% natural seltzer, calorie-free. It is ruby red grapefruit. All in all, a pretty good seltzer flavor, I'd say. Pretty good one. Okay. The book of Leviticus. Where do we start with the book of Leviticus? So, the book of Leviticus uniquely demonstrates God's covenant relationship with Israel. So, God's decided that the Israelites are the chosen people here. And he needs to really, really, really make a very tight bond with them. So, again, lots of laws and rituals. And laws and rituals that are uniquely tailored and cultivated to Israel for the purpose of establishing and kind of fortifying them as a holy nation. There are instructions given to the Israelites for maintaining purity. There are instructions given to the Israelites for atoning for sin, for making sacrifices, for making offerings, and rituals. There's a lot of stuff in Leviticus. Rules for the priesthood, rules for diet, rules for festivals, rules for ethics, and a real sort of emphasis of God on the need to be holy and to be obedient to God's commands. Now, there is some organization here in the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus basically it covers a number of different kinds of rules. It's not a lot of storytelling, but it covers some different kinds of rules, some bodies of rules. The first one is basically a set of rules about different offerings. And in sort of as this is all being framed, this sort of happens it's under the rubric of basically God talking to Moses. So basically God calls Moses into a tent and he makes a whole bunch of instructions to him that Moses is then in turn supposed to pass along to the Israelites. So I guess what happens is at some point Moses goes in a tent, he's there for a long time, he comes out and he starts shouting rules at people. And the premise here is that God has bestowed these rules on him and not that he made them up off the top of his head. So the rules that get made, basically you have rules about offerings. So we learned in Genesis and Exodus that God is really, really, really interested in having people make burnt offerings to him, and probably not hamburgers on a grill. But we had to put some imagery here. So we have instructions for burnt offerings, grain offerings, fellowship offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, and then some other random instructions regarding consuming the offerings. So these are, they're kind of all over the place. Instructions for presenting burnt offerings, emphasizing voluntary worship and atonement. We have regulations concerning the presentation of grain offerings, emphasizing gratitude and acknowledgement of God's provision. I guess the premise being that, like, if you have a bountiful harvest, and probably not a lot of bountiful harvests, considering everybody's wandering through the desert here, but if you have bounty, you have to, like, thank God for this and offer some of it to God. Fellowship offerings, that's kind of about, like, communal celebration, communion with God. There's, I guess, the kinds of offerings you have to make when you've sinned and you've got to repent. And then there's, like, just lots and lots and lots of rules around exactly what and how you have to make those offerings. We'll talk a little about some of the specifics of that as we dig in. Then we have, like, a whole body of chapters that's really about the consecration of priests. So I guess one of the important things as the Israelites are wandering the desert here, again, God's trying to, like, establish this covenant with the Israelites, is to make sure that there is, like, a really solemn kind of churchy relationship amongst the people, between the people and the people that can speak to God, and there needs to be, like, a level of buy-in with priests. And so Moses all along has been working with this guy Aaron, who is, like, highly, highly trusted, both by Moses and by the people around. Now, Aaron has some weaknesses, because when Moses goes up to get the Ten Commandments, Aaron is kind of not very able to hold the ship together. And that's when the people all go off and they start worshiping the golden calf. But perhaps in response to that, God decides, I guess he needs some rules here for how the priest could get consecrated according to his instructions. And of course, as part of the consecration of Aaron, there is there's some sacrifices made, and I guess God gets mad for a little bit here as they're consecrating the priests. There's a kind of tragic account of I guess a couple of Aaron's sons who they offer unauthorized fire to the Lord and are in turn consumed by the fire, which is a pretty grisly way to go. The parts of Leviticus that maybe get the most attention in the public consciousness are the ensuing chapters, in which God gets really, really, really picky about laws of purity and impurity. You know, what you can eat, how you can act, who you can sleep with, things like that. So there are a whole bunch of dietary laws about what animals are clean and unclean. There are laws about childbirth, instructions for purification after childbirth, and all kinds of rules about, who is clean and unclean for how long, and, around menstruation and childbirth, things like that. There are a bunch of laws about skin diseases, basically how you're supposed to act, like when people get infected with some skin disease, which I guess back then was, like, a really, really common thing. Obviously there were a lot more just contracted diseases that were very dangerous and potent anyway. You could die from just getting, like, a simple cold or flu back in those days. But particularly in the desert, where that sand is beating down on you all the time, I guess skin conditions, which can be very, very, very contagious, were a big deal. So God establishes a lot of regulations for identifying and handling skin diseases and molds. He also gets really picky about bodily discharges. So instructions for handling bodily discharges and achieving purification. So that's fun stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics of it. Of course, there are instructions for rituals to be performed on the Day of Atonement, including offerings for the sins of people. There are, there's like a whole bunch of rules about holiness and atonement. There are a whole bunch of sexual ethics that get described in Leviticus. Laws prohibiting incest, laws prohibiting adultery, and other various sexual offenses. So you got to live a very godly sexual life in Leviticus. Laws covering topics such as social justice, worship practices, sabbaticals, blessings for obedience, warnings of curses for disobedience, regulations concerning vows made to the Lord. Yeah, it gets kind of very specific and very, very crazy in early Leviticus. There's just a lot of rules, and we don't have time to like dig into all of the specific rules in Leviticus. But some of it begs the question of why all these rules. There's kind of a few overarching reasons for why God is so picky about some of these things, and it's like why does any of this make sense? Like why is God being picky about how you have sex, for instance? And I would say, by and large, there are kind of three reasons God gets really picky about things in Leviticus. We know he's trying to establish this sort of chosen society that started with like a single guy. It kind of became a tribe, and now it's like he wants to make it into a society that's going to become a kingdom that becomes really successful in the world. And again, we always sort of talk about the Old Testament. You got to sort of think about the Old Testament backwards. Like, we have basically one book from all these little tribes that kind of circulated in this part of the world back in those days. There's one book that prevailed over all of them. So it has to have been basically the story of what became essentially the most successful of the tribes, the Israelites. And we find out later that Israelites become very, very good at conquering people later on, under the kings and the judges that follow Moses. So this society had to be exquisitely well constructed for that all to be possible. So here as they wander the desert, God's trying to basically do three things. One of which is he's basically just trying to like hold the tribe together. Like he just needs the people to kind of be bound by something. And a set of rules is very good for binding people together. If people believe that there is some higher power they're reporting to, and there's some trustworthy body of people like priests that can basically enforce and spread the word of God, and then the people sort of believe in the word of God, like that helps hold the society together. It's why when people lose faith in their governments, when people start believing governments are corrupt and aren't operating in their best interests, it gets really, really dangerous for the stability of society. So why is God setting rules for priests? Well, partly because he's just trying to kind of hold the tribe together. And all these people that are grumbling in the desert, he's trying to make sure they don't grumble too much. Part of it is that this needs to be like a really strong tribe in order to help spread the faith. So people that believe in a cause, people that sort of believe they're adhering to some like solemn set of rules, are more likely to work together and then fight really hard when they have to in order to help spread their faith to others. So the establishment of covenants, for instance, especially like happy wife, happy life, the old saying, like, if people's families are being kept intact and there are rules there to kind of keep people's marriages and relations functional, then they'll be, hopefully happier, hopefully more productive and contributing members of the society, better willing to help spread that version of society. So how do we spread the faith? That's part of why we have so many rules here. The other piece is really, really interesting, which is how much of the rules in Leviticus have to do with epidemiology. And, we think about, like, why was God so interested in some of these things? Why was God so interested in skin diseases? Why was he so picky about circumcision? Well, you're a little tribe living in the desert. Like, this is basic public health. The Bible is one of the very oldest books of all time that deals with the topic of epidemiology. And I think when people kind of lose sight of the context, so many things in society where we don't really understand the historical context, and we're quick to malign them. With the historical context, like God's trying to basically develop a public health regime here. And it's kind of incredible that was happening. People didn't really know a lot about public health. And yet they're doing their best here to set up a set of rules and to connect those rules to this covenant with God. They're just about keeping people healthy. And so a lot of Leviticus, a lot of the crazy stuff in Leviticus is basically a version of epidemiology, which is kind of an interesting thing. Okay. We got a few comments here in the chat, guys, and I appreciate it. I'm lurking. Thank you for the ducks and others who are commenting here. I appreciate those comments as well. Al the Pal has joined us here in the chat, as has Timmy Tushu. Divine laws, moral conducts of a functioning society. Timmy Tushu says, this is nothing. I went to Catholic school. You should have been there. Well, these are some of the most intense rules in the entire Bible. So, some of this it is pretty intense stuff at times. So, again, we don't really have time to tackle all of the rules, but we can try to summarize as much as we can here. So, I don't know, where do we kind of dig in? There's when we talked about this idea of laws of offerings. The basic premise of an offering, as outlined at the beginning of Leviticus, is that as sort of part of the process of worshiping God, there are various instances in which you're supposed to bring usually a male animal, without blemish, so a good-looking male animal, usually cattle, sheep, or goats, to the entrance of a tent for a meeting. You're supposed to lay your hand on the head of the animal, symbolizing your identification with the animal, then sacrifice. Then you slaughter it, and then you sacrifice it. Usually a priest would sprinkle blood around the altar. The animal would get skinned and cut into pieces. The pieces would be arranged on the altar and then burned to establish a pleasing aroma. And if you ever smelled burning meat, I can imagine it would be kind of a pleasing aroma. The burnt offering signifies complete surrender and atonement for sin. So that's when you're offering an animal. Now, there are also rules about grain offerings, which usually involve a combination of flour, oil, and frankincense. And Leviticus gets very specific into the preparation of these things, where you're supposed to different circumstances, bake them in an oven, make them in a pan, or cook them on a griddle, and then I guess offer them up to the Lord. It's it gets kind of all over the place. You've got the rules in the different offerings, and this is the first several chapters of Leviticus vary quite a bit based on the type of the animal. Specific edicts fat covering the entrails, certain animal organs getting burned on the altar, while the breast gets presented to the priest as a wave offering, and the right thigh as a different kind of contribution. And I guess you're supposed to offer part of the animal to God and then eat the rest of the animal with the priests. Sometimes you have to make an offering because you've sinned. So usually when you would sin, I guess you would offer a young bull. I don't know what the bull did. A male goat for a leader, or a female goat or a lamb for an individual. So I guess if you're a leader in the society, you offer a male goat. If you're just a regular, everyday average Joe, you'd offer a female goat or a lamb. The blood of the sacrifice would be sprinkled before the veil of the sanctuary, and the fat would be burned on the altar, while the rest of the animal would be disposed of outside the camp. So I guess in that case, you don't eat the rest of the animal. Now, if you're guilty of something, for instance, trespassing or deceit against your neighbor, failure to testify, touching unclean things, or swearing falsely. In that case, chapter 5 of Leviticus talks about how you would want to sacrifice a ram without blemish. And again, the blood would be sprinkled on the altar, the fat would be burned, and then the ram would be required to be repaid to the offended party with a fifth added. So I guess you would owe like 1.2 rams to the person you offended after your sacrifice. So, like, I don't get too specific about some of the rules on the sacrificing of the animals, but God does get very particular about what's a clean and an unclean animal. A lot of this splits along which animals have split hooves and which don't. You're not supposed to eat animals, for instance, don't eat animals that don't have fins and scales. It's fish. Don't mate two different kinds of animals. That's an important thing. So you wouldn't want like the giraffe zebra hybrid. Imagine taking that like the pig down there and merging it with the crab, and you'd have like a crab pig. Anyway, I guess the animals on top are clean. Animals on the bottom here are unclean. This is from Leviticus 11. Leviticus 19 tells us don't plant two different kinds of seeds in your field. And then also don't wear clothing made from two different types of fabric. So, yeah, we get lots of like rules about animals. So yeah, we get very, very picky about the animals. Then we get some rules, basically about how you groom yourself in Leviticus. They're very into like hair at the temples. The Bible forbids men from trimming their beards. Leviticus 19 is basically where God says, don't trim off the hair at your temples. You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. Some of this is like covenant stuff. Probably some of this is like the potential infections you could get from shaving and things like that. Lots and lots of just kind of little grooming things. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed, neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee. So, like, no mixed fabrics that you should wear. It's lots of little grooming restrictions, and you can sort of like read into like why these particular restrictions. But yeah, you're not supposed to cut your hair at your temples. Shaving. Yeah, not. I mean, I don't know. Like, how long would a beard get if you just never shaved it? I guess eventually some of the hairs would fall out. You gotta trim your beard eventually, wouldn't you? I mean, I need probably as good like utensils to trim your hair back in those days, but you probably have to trim it eventually. So yeah, no man bear pigs. That'd be a tough one. Keep the animals pure. Don't eat bats or owls. That's another important thing here in Leviticus. Leviticus 11. And these are they which ye shall have an abomination among the fowls. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, and the ossifrage, and the osprey, and the vulture, and the kite after his kind, every raven after his kind, and the owl, and the nighthawk, and the cuckoo, and the hawk after his kind, and the little owl, and the cormorant, and the great owl, and the swan, and the pelican, and the gear eagle, and the stork, the heron after her kind, and the lapwing, and the bat, So, don't eat birds. Don't eat bats. You know, we should have learned this. We've seen what happens when the whole eating bats thing. Bad stuff can transpire if you eat owls, nighthawks, bats, herons, storks. I'm surprised they had all these birds in the desert. When I was in the desert, the Middle East, one of the things they were showing us was the way they could like send falcons off, and then have them return. But I don't know. That's a lot of different animals for the middle of the desert. Anyway, you're not supposed to eat those things, and I guess that's part of. Let's see. That's part of the bucket of chapters, I guess, on laws of purity and impurity. So again, lots of pickiness about clean and unclean animals here. Okay, then we have things like really kind of jealous, vengeful God here. Leviticus 24. Whoever utters the name of the Lord must be put to death. So, a lot of people are very critical of like the Quran and sort of how it talks about, punishments for people that use the image or likeness of Muhammad. But the Bible has a lot of its own seemingly very, very extreme prescriptions about how you talk about God, how you worship God, when you worship God. The Sabbath is a very, very important thing. Whoever utters the name of the Lord must be put to death. The whole community must stone him, whether alien or native. If he utters the name, he must be put to death. A lot of stoning. And yeah, don't use the name of the Lord in vain. And that's what they're alluding to here. And that's one of the commandments. You're not supposed to use the name of the Lord in vain. This is, I don't want to sort of like try to conflate, the sort of holiness of the Bible here at this juncture with, something that's obviously of a sort of lesser magnitude. But this is a technique sort of in marketing, brand protection. If you want to like create a really successful brand that people respect and they look up to, the details matter. Uber faced this years ago. So Uber was, when Uber started, you guys remember when Uber started, like taxis were everything. Policymakers were obsessed with bikes and public transit. And then like Uber came on the scene and like just totally changed the world. And suddenly people could go anywhere. But the prospect of getting into a stranger's car is something that, long carried a lot of danger to it. The whole sort of world of hitchhiking went away in part because people perceived it as being really, really, really dangerous. And so when Uber came along, I think one of the things that Uber was really, really cognizant of was the importance of making sure the Uber brand was kept in high esteem by consumers. And so Uber set really, really, really strict restrictions on their employees and around anybody who worked for them, any drivers, about how and where the Uber logo could be displayed and used. Because the second that you started seeing like an Uber bumper sticker end up in like a urinal somewhere, suddenly Uber would be viewed as a sleazy and dangerous product. And because they were so rigorous about brand protection, they were able to make Uber into something that people actually feel relatively confident is trustworthy. So, like, why would God care so much about people uttering his name in vain? Why would Moses and Aaron care so much about people uttering the name of the Lord in vain? Well, the more you treat that name as sacred and holy, and you really make people think about it before they say that word, the more it's going to sort of build up this level of respect and trust and kind of high esteem for this sort of origin point of these rules in society. So the idea of you must stone somebody for saying the name, like that's pretty intense. We don't typically go for stoning these days. Stoning generally in the West is not an approved of punishment. There are, however, a few countries in the world where stoning is in fact still used as a punishment. And if you've ever seen videos of this is actually quite disturbing. But you go to places like Saudi Arabia, they still do stoning as punishment. Of course, they also chop off hands and do crucifixions as well. Now, most of the countries where stoning still gets used as a punishment are majority Muslim countries. There are a couple of small countries around the world where stoning is still legal that are not majority Muslim, but by and large, stoning is no longer a thing. We don't do it here in the U.S., but lines like that, like they feel very culturally out of context, very intense, and I think it's part of why people really don't. People don't really like dig in Leviticus to some of these like people don't really, Leviticus doesn't resonate with people quite so much. Okay, there's God's really negative on people cursing their parents. Leviticus 20, anyone who curses their father or their mother is to be put to death, because they have cursed their father or mother. Their blood will be on their own head. In other words, you say mean things about your parents, like you're getting killed. And God says this a few times in the Old Testament. God does not want snarky teenagers. But again, part of this is like, strong nuclear families. If you start sort of thinking about this in like an epidemiological or like a, how do you make a strong society with good hierarchies of parenting? Like, God is the most strict about the things that matter the most from the standpoint of making a strong culture within the community. So don't be mean to your parents. Homosexual relations, not something that the God of Leviticus is a big fan of. Leviticus 20. If a man has sexual relations with a man, as one does with a woman, both have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. So, yes, don't engage in homosexual relations. Now, why would God care? Well, practically speaking, of course, they're trying to grow the tribe. This is a tribe that started with one family, the family of Abraham. And God is trying to, over time, grow this tribe amidst all of the risky diseases and whatnot of the day. They're trying to grow this tribe into like a great kingdom. So they want you going out and having kids. They want you going out and having families, traditional, stable families with multiple parents. And, the kids respect the parents. And, there's sort of clear delineation of labor, sort of unconventional relationships that don't lead to children or which sort of break up that traditional family structure, not conducive to creating a kingdom that ultimately is going to take out adversaries. Similarly, epidemiological considerations here. Of course, there's a lot of concern about diseases and things like that. How much is that playing into some of this rule setting about various relations? Now, one of the things that, of course, is quite controversial in Leviticus, it pretty unequivocally condones, it certainly does not push back against slavery, which was something that was commonplace in the day. In an era of history before you had major mechanical technology, much as you relied on animals in order to plow fields and not machinery, slavery was basically the way that big projects got done. Virtually every society in the world enslaved others, just for any particular reason. Basically, you could conquer somebody, you could probably enslave them. And Leviticus very explicitly in Leviticus 25 says, "You may purchase male or female slaves from among the foreigners who live among you." So as long as it's a foreigner, I guess you can enslave them. You may also purchase the children of such resident foreigners, including those who have been born in your land. You may treat them as your property, passing them on to your children as a permanent inheritance. You may treat your slaves like this, but the people of Israel, your relatives, must never be treated this way. So there's a real delineation between the God of the New Testament, which overarchingly seems to kind of carry a vibe of like, be really nice to everyone, regardless. And the meekest among you, treat the best. With the God of the early Old Testament here, which is very tribal. It's a God that is very, very partial to the Israelites over others. And as we get deeper into the Old Testament, there will be numerous instances in where the victory and conquest and even the brutal death and killing of others that are not Israelites is something that is deemed for extensive celebration. But yes, apparently, if there are foreigners who live among you, God says here that you are basically allowed to treat them as your property and then pass them on to your children as permanent inheritance. You may treat your slaves like this. Just don't do that to other Israelites. God is not a fan of prostitution in Leviticus. If a daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, he says in Leviticus 21, she disgraces her father. I mean, I think a lot of people would not fans of their kids becoming prostitutes. I guess there are those who sort of defend sex work as a viable profession these days, but the Bible doesn't seem to like that. Now, I think where people would pause a little bit is where Leviticus lays out what you should do about this if you do have a daughter that defiles herself by becoming a prostitute. She must be burned in the fire, God says here in Leviticus 21. This is the God of pretty major temper here. Big time tempers here in Leviticus. Burning your daughter, your own daughter, in the fire. I mean, we already know God was trying to get Abraham to be willing to burn Isaac at the stake. And for some reason, he was rewarded for that because it was the courage and belief. He'd be celebrated here, I guess, because you would burn your daughter in the fire because she became a prostitute. And then, of course, Lucky's alluding here in the chat to some of the rules about how that fire would probably have to be set. Yeah, some of these are just they're very hard to reconcile. But again, this is if you sort of think about it retroactively, that a society that had really, really, really strong rules probably was the society that became successful enough to win the battles that ultimately set the narrative that their God was the best God. This is kind of why some of this stuff is in here. So, we learned a lot in Genesis and Exodus about God's number one covenant with his people. And of course, it wouldn't be a book of the Old Testament without it coming up once again. More circumcision shows up here in the Old Testament. In the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. So if you are an Israelite, you are to be circumcised on the 8th day of your life. I mean, this has been reiterated so many times here in the Old Testament that it is one of the most unmistakable things. Now, one of the things that's a little bit strange here is historically it is understood that as the Israelites wandered the desert here over the course of the 40 years, as they sort of proved their worth and holiness to God by, in fits and starts, learning to obey every one of God's edicts, it is so reported that gradually over time the Israelites became a little bit wishy-washy about how rigorously they stuck to the tradition of circumcising. So when the Israelites finally get delivered from the desert, it was a mixed bag. Some foreskins, some no skins. An average of 2 skins, perhaps. But males are not the only folks that God gets really, really, really interested in the inner workings of here. God is also very, very focused on menstruation. In the book of Leviticus, God says, if a woman has an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days. So God's sort of like, God, I guess this is proof that God's a guy, because God isn't really that comfortable talking about menstruation either. He can't just come out and say it. If a woman have an issue, and her issue is her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days, and whoever toucheth her shall be unclean until the evening. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. And whoever toucheth her bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. This is Leviticus 15. More epidemiology happening here. This is a pre-modern, sanitary utensils era here. So menstruation, of course, is something that carries with it some risk. There's blood involved. It's, God probably just finds a little maybe yucky. And so, from the standpoint of making sure the society is kind of kept pure, a woman who's menstruating is supposed to keep herself apart for 7 days. Now, I guess that gives her a little buffer period. And then if anybody touches her or really goes near her, then they too have to wash and are considered unclean until I guess the next day. And then all the sheets, everything she sat on, anything where there was a risk of her bleeding, I guess would be unclean. They need to be washed and sort of put apart. So there's some real kind of public health stuff going on here. So Leviticus is a bit of a messy book. We've barely scratched the surface in terms of some of the many things that Leviticus delves into. There's a lot of rule setting, and a lot of people are very conflicted by Leviticus. It is the most intense book of the entire Bible, and there's a lot of intensity in the Old Testament. It is the most intense version of God as a rule maker, as a punisher. God is very willing to put people to death for what seem like relatively minor offenses, and it, in no uncertain term, accommodates, describes, even encourages slavery, human sacrifice, and even molestation in Leviticus. God in Leviticus is clearly obsessed with being worshipped. He does not like being disobeyed, and again, the punishments get very, very, very intense. And so Leviticus is a bit of an interesting book to parse. Of course, if you think about it in the context of societal establishment in a way, Leviticus maybe is a really, really, really impactful and revolutionary book, because it might be one of the first epidemiological tomes in all of human history. And that's pretty interesting. Okay. Leviticus is very dry. It is a book that is basically rules. Some of the rules are interesting because they are so out of left field, seemingly. The ensuing books of Numbers and Deuteronomy are a little bit more interesting, just because they involve a little bit of storytelling. Not like Genesis and Exodus, which are these epic, epic, epic tales. But Numbers and Deuteronomy are sort of a blend between a little bit of context setting and storytelling and some more rules. And so we're going to talk about those here as we continue to move along on the Bible stream here. But before we do that, I want to pause, and I want to give one of our mods a chance to chime in here with a couple of thoughts on our streams.
Hello everybody, it's Moniker here. If you're enjoying tonight's content, just a reminder, we have hundreds of prior streams covering all kinds of other topics. Click on the channel icon and see all of our past content, including our old streams with the ducks, footage of DC, deep dives on everything from Jeffrey Epstein to swimming pools. And while you're at it, just a reminder to like and subscribe on the channel. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight.
All right, guys, we are back here on Land Speculation on YouTube. I appreciate you hanging out with us here as we are working our way through the Bible, stream by stream. And it's been a little bit since we have done our last Bible stream. And so, we need to catch up here a little bit. Tonight, we, of course, are tackling the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which are a little bit of a bridge in the Bible. You'll find this as sort of a sequence in the Bible where you have like some great storytelling, and then the Bible will kind of pause for a little bit, and it'll sort of try to infill with either some rule setting, or later on you have books like Proverbs and Psalms where you just learn a little bit more about some of the kind of more experiential or qualitative or thinky things that were going on in the backdrop of some of the storytelling. And it's actually one of the beautiful things about the Bible, in a way, is that it's not just purely a story. You get some of the kind of color and detail in the background. So that's kind of what we're getting here. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They are, again, they're sort of less rich books, maybe, than Genesis and Exodus. But they do provide important context to really what's going on here as the Israelites wander the desert for 40, I'm sure, very difficult and trying years, because it could not have been all that pleasant to be wandering the desert for 40 years. Anyway, guys, if you wouldn't mind, as always, dropping a like and a subscribe to the video, I appreciate it. The likes help us out with YouTube. The subscribes help you guys know when we are on. Make sure, as always, to check our description for links to our Discord, which is a great place to chat about stuff. We do have our religion channel. If you want to go check that out on the Discord, you can talk about the Bible yourself if you feel so inclined. And then, of course, the Duck Fund is our PayPal link if anybody wants to support the stream and offer us a donation. I appreciate those contributions anytime we get them. So I'm tracking the chat here. Of course, I'm trying not to do... I'm trying not to I mean, we do different kinds of streams here on Land Speculation. Some streams are really sort of purely about kind of chatting with you guys who are here in the chat. And then some of our streams, we know that people come back and listen to after the fact. And so sometimes when we do these deep dive type streams, I do a little bit less comment reading on the streams. But I'm certainly reading about some of the things you're talking about here in the chat. And I see people are trying to guess my age, Moniker's age, various ages here in the chat, as well as various other comments about Leviticus. So appreciate all the comments here in the chat for the folks who are live. George, Al the Pal, Skitty Squirrel, I'm lurking. I can't remember who I greeted earlier on. But anyway, if you're here, Jerry Carter, Lucky, I appreciate you guys hanging out with us here on Land Speculation on YouTube, as always. Jerry Carter's here for an educated experience. Well, I don't know, guys. We're winging this. We're figuring out the Bible together as we go along here. And, as always, I should have offered our caveats that we always use when we're talking about the Bible on Land Speculation here on YouTube, which is these Bible streams are a bit of an experiment. People were asking for these for a long time. We finally got around to starting this series. So, I'm not like a religious scholar. I've been learning a lot as I've gone through this series. One of the things I've found is that the internet is full of little summaries of the Bible, if you want like a really, really, really in-depth kind of academic, kind of biblical historian assessment of the like, outline of the book and things like that, it gets really into the weeds. And what we're trying to kind of do here a little bit more is give you a little bit of color and context while also telling the stories of what's happening in the Bible, but to sort of put it all a little bit in a bigger picture. And we're trying to do that in a way that's respectful, both of people who, for whom the Bible really is the inspired Word of God, and then also people who, are a little bit more skeptical. So our caveats, as always, we can't cover everything that's in the Bible. We've got a limited number of streams here. We're only like 3 or 4 books into the Bible, and we're already in stream number 5. So we're going to have to pick up the pace here a little bit as we go along. So we can't cover everything. There's probably stuff in the Bible that people really love, favorite stories, favorite passages. We're not going to be able to get to all of it. But if there are things you really, love about the Bible, things that you think are really important, please feel free to either drop your thoughts in the chat or on a religion channel on the Discord. I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm trying to figure this out right alongside you guys. Many of you may know more about the Bible than I do, so I get it, but we're all kind of figuring this out together. And of course, everyone has different beliefs. So, we hope we're doing this in a way that is respectful. And I think, the Bible is an important book, I think, to look at sometimes from multiple angles. Because I think what you often get are people that interpret the Bible, and sort of talk about it as a completely literal experience, and try to, provide explanations and defenses for every single passage in the Bible. And you get folks that are much more skeptical who look at the Bible and they want to just like pick out little phrases and passages, sometimes from Leviticus, which has some passages that, are pretty hard to reconcile in a modern context. They look at that and they say, this Bible, this is a ridiculous thing. How could anybody possibly believe in this? And I think what we're trying to provide a little bit of color and flavor for is, like, why was the Bible written the way it was? What's in it? What's really impactful and meaningful? How has this shaped our world? Why would God be the way God's being at different points? And where are there inconsistencies and oddities within the Bible? So we're trying to do this in as kind of respectful a way as we can. But everyone has different beliefs, and I don't know, if you're finding yourself really like offended by the way that we're talking about, I think it's really not intentional, but please let me know. Email landspeculation@gmail.com. Appreciate the outreach and the engagement on the channel. So let's dig in a little bit deeper here, because Leviticus is only book number 3. There are 2 more books in the Pentateuch. The first, book 4, is, of course, the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers. So the book of Numbers essentially builds on the book of Leviticus. In the book of Numbers, there's a little bit of kind of context setting and storytelling. Now, we know God's like laid down all these rules. And I'm sure if you're one of the Israelites wandering the desert, you might be a little skeptical. And not surprisingly, because this has been basically a recurring theme across Genesis and Exodus so far. People who God created in his own image, but for some reason with free will of their own, repeatedly seem to be disappointing him. And this is the case here in Numbers. So Israel, or at least portions of Israel, fail to trust and obey God in Numbers. So they're wandering the desert. God did not pre-establish 40 years as the timeline for wandering in the desert. We knew we were going to be wandering in the desert for a while, but God basically is just trying to get the Israelites ready to deliver them to the Promised Land. Part of the reason they end up in the desert for so long is because they are disobedient. And, to a degree, who can blame them? I mean, there's a lot of really, really, really arcane rules going on here. But whenever they break the rules, whenever they get all, prickly, God's kind of playing a little power struggle with them. And God's going to win a power struggle with you. If you're trying to, doubt God, the Old Testament teaches you anything. It's like, don't doubt God. However inexplicable it may seem to you, just do it. So in Numbers, you get a little bit of history of the Israelites' journey from Mount Sinai. So we talked about the whole story of Mount Sinai. Basically up to the edge of the Promised Land. So we know, we talked about it, from Genesis through Exodus, there was this back and forth. Abraham's family, they were up here, and they ended up going to Egypt, and then they got enslaved in Egypt, and now they've been delivered back out of Egypt, and now they're kind of stuck in here. So they were somewhere between Mount Sinai, which is like kind of in this area, and Canaan, which is where ultimately they want to be headed. So in this journey where they're stuck in the desert, they go through little gambits of rebellion, faithlessness, and then, there's a lot of kind of patting God on the back here, because it's like, even though the people are unfaithful, God sticks with them. Well, God's also setting the rules for them and determining that they're being unfaithful. So, the Israelites and God are kind of going on an adventure together here. And in the book of Numbers, we get a bit of a chronicling of the census of the Israelites. We get some descriptions of the organization of their tribes. We get stories of their travels through the wilderness. We get stories of rebellion, punishment, divine intervention. We get some pretty epic stories. The spies, the bronze serpent. So there are lots of little setbacks along the way, but the book of Numbers ultimately reaffirms God's covenant with Israel, prepares them for entry into the promised land. So this is more than just rule setting, some storytelling here. There is, I guess, some organization here to the book of Numbers, which basically starts with the recording of a census. So I guess, I don't know why God cares so much, but God commands Moses and Aaron to go take a census of the Israelites. So we're starting to kind of get the organization of the Israelites into 12 tribes, which are basically 12 camps organized around the tabernacle. And they all kind of get assigned responsibilities, and this is kind of becoming a little bit more of a functional society. There are, of course, more rules, purity, restitution. There's bitter water for a little bit, which is a bit of an issue. There are unclean individuals that show up in the camp that have to be removed. There, I guess, are some stories around the celebration of the Passover feast, which, despite being kind of an abhorrent story in Exodus, is now being celebrated as the seminal feast of the Israelite year. And of course, God's sort of eternal looming presence over the Israelites here. There's lots and lots and lots of complaining that happens here in Numbers. That's kind of the crux of the book of Numbers. Here's the Israelites wandering the desert. They start complaining a lot. They complain about their hardships in the wilderness, particularly the lack of meat. Well, you're in the middle of the desert. The extent of big fatty animals is probably fairly meager. And, God on the one hand is saying be grateful to me, I'm so good to you. And on the other hand, he's not giving them any meat. So where's the damn meat? People are a little unhappy about this. So people, they start complaining about the lack of meat here in the book of Numbers. And God replies by sending them quail. But then just to make sure they're reminded not to complain any further, God also sends them a plague as a punishment for their ingratitude. So that's a bit of an issue. There's a famous story here we're going to talk about, the sending of the spies. But that happens here. And, it's one of these stories where a lot of people doubt. A lot of people doubt God, but only a few righteous individuals really come through and triumph. And that's, part of a perpetuating theme. I remember having teachers in, grade school. I remember I was in third grade. I remember getting an assignment where, there was a paper with a whole bunch of stuff on it. And we were given the whole class, we're going to do this assignment. And the first thing on the paper, it was read all these instructions first and then go back and start doing the assignment. And then there was a whole list of little tasks you were supposed to do on this paper. And of course, we all sat down and we started working on this worksheet. And we started doing these little tasks, and I can't remember what they were, but there was a whole bunch of little time-consuming tasks on the thing. Of course, the very final task at the bottom of the page was ignore everything above this line and put your pencil down and sit there quietly. And of course, the great lesson of this exercise was you're supposed to obey the directions, read the entire paper first, and if you had read the entire paper first, you would know that the rest of this was just busy work you didn't really have to do. And there was only one girl in my entire class that actually did read the entire paper. And so she was sitting there basically doing nothing while the rest of us were mired in this busy work. And at the end of the class, the teacher, joyously lavished praise upon this one girl who sat there, now believing she was, the chosen one. The rest of us were left to kind of writhe around in our shame. And it's kind of a theme here. It's sort of a theme. It's a biblical theme. This idea of, large groups of people. Most of them doubt God, but then there's a righteous person or two who comes through. And that happens here in Numbers. There are various laws and regulations, more laws about sacrifices, observances of festivals, instructions for handling unintentional sins and defilement, purification of water, purification, lots and lots and lots of little arcane rules here in Numbers. And of course, there are more stories about wandering and conquest. Lack of water in the desert's a bit of an issue. Conflict with other nations. In Numbers, Moses ends up striking a rock to bring forth water. But they still can't enter the promised land. They basically go on like a little military conquest. They conquest lands east of the Jordan River. And they ultimately start, squabbling amongst the little tribes of Israel. And they even divide up land. They divide up conquered territory among the tribes in Numbers. So lots of little things that are happening here in the desert. And a lot of them are sort of a continuation of the things we were talking about in Leviticus. So that's basically what happens here in Numbers. No rules about inheritances, marriage rules, all kinds of stuff. So one of the famous stories that happens in the book of Numbers is this story of the sending of the spies. This is a story in Numbers 13. So Moses, I guess at the bequest of God, sends 12 spies, one for each tribe of Israel, to go scout out the land of Canaan. So this is the promised land where the Israelites are eventually supposed to head. And it is a little bit inexplicable because the Israelites are they're wandering the desert here for 40 years. But it is a little bit unclear as they do this, well, why don't they just go to Canaan? I know God doesn't want them to go, but why don't they just go? And I guess part of it is that they're lost. But apparently, Moses sends these 12 spies out to go explore the land of Canaan, which is basically the promised land that God ultimately promised to give to the Israelites. The spies are instructed to assess the land, to understand who lives there, and to, kind of get a picture of what kinds of resources are there. And the land of Canaan, compared to this, otherwise very oppressive desert, it's it could not be more lavish because there are plants and stuff. Little rivers. Now, probably not rivers that had water all year round, but rivers that had a little bit of water in them. So they're also going to scout this stuff. And they go. The spies basically go for 40 days, which is, everything in the Bible is like either a 3 or a 7 or a 40. So after 40 days, the spies return with their report. They confirmed that the land did indeed flows with milk and honey, and they brought back samples of the produce. I've always been a little bit uncertain about what this thing with the milk and honey that happens here, multiple times in the Bible. Like, has anybody ever had milk mixed with honey? Like, is that actually a good combination? It doesn't intuitively sound all that great. But maybe it is. It looks, this makes it look decent. Anyway, the land of Canaan flows with milk and honey and produce. Salad with your milk and honey. Now, after they get back from this little exploration, 10 of the spies decide that they're not so sure about this whole thing. They express doubt, fear in God. And they report that the land actually is inhabited by powerful giants, the descendants of Anak. And they assert that the cities within Canaan are fortified and impregnable. So it's like, we can't possibly go conquer Canaan. There are only 2 people of the 12, Joshua and Caleb, who express faith in God's ability to give them victory. And they encourage the people to trust in God's promise. Now the Israelites get this report back of these giants that inhabit the land of Canaan. And they respond to the report with fear and despair, weeping and complaining against Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron, I can't really figure out whether Moses and Aaron are keeping this, they're sort of inventing all these rules in order to keep an iron fist over the people, and whether the people are, have a legitimate gripe here, or whether Moses and Aaron are just trying to do right by God and instead are dealing with all these constantly complaining and griping people. Anyway, they're dealing with a whole bunch of people who are all upset now. The people express a desire to return to Egypt, and even consider stoning Joshua and Caleb, just because they were like, we should continue to trust in God. This is like a very dramatic emotions here. Imagine things being so bad, being so fearful that you want to go return back to a life of slavery in Egypt. Joshua and Caleb plead with the people to trust in God and not rebel against him. Now, God's he's always listening in, because God's really following the plight of the Israelites here. God becomes very angry with the people for their lack of faith. He threatens to destroy them, of course. Moses intercedes on behalf of the people, appealing to God's mercy, and reminding God of his covenant promises to the Israelites. God's, it's like, I circumcised all these people for a reason. These are supposed to be my chosen people, and if I destroy them now, then I got to start all over again. So God relents ultimately from destroying the people. God keeps destroying people and saying he's never going to do it again, and then he keeps getting tempted to do it. So temper kind of works that way. God declares that none of the adults who doubted him would enter the promised land. So this is basically why it turns into 40 years. If you doubted me, you don't get to go to the promised land. Your kids will get to go to the promised land, but not you. Basically what God tells them, which is kind of a brutal punishment on people. But, I guess they can die with the satisfaction of knowing that God's going to finally let their kids into the promised land, and then everything's going to be happy after that. Even though it ultimately isn't, because even after they enter the promised land, they still end up engaged in conflict for hundreds of years. Because life was tough back then. As punishment for the lack of faith, the Israelites are condemned to wander the wilderness for 40 years. 1 year for each day the spies explored the land, so it's very symbolic. 10 faithless spies die of a plague while Joshua and Caleb are spared. The Israelites, in turn, express remorse and probably are pretty scared. And they attempt to enter the land against God's command, but they are defeated by the Amalekites and the Canaanites. So even after all this, people still disobey God and attempt to enter the promised land anyway, and God makes sure that they have enemies that are stronger yet than they are, because they haven't yet been obedient enough. They haven't yet sort of fortified themselves enough and grown the tribe enough in order to be able to defeat these enemy tribes. Okay, milk with honey is just sweet milk, says Lucky. The milk is goat milk. I suspect it's not the milk we know today. So maybe you need the honey in the goat milk in order to make it taste better. Probably didn't have very good refrigeration back in those days. So, lukewarm milk, probably not quite as good as, really fresh, cold, iced milk. Okay, God is, along the way, God's sort of like a parent to the Israelites. He's teaching them a number of lessons. And, of course, there are lots of sort of themes that end up being recurring themes across the Old Testament. One of the themes is told through this story of Balaam and the donkey, which is a pretty important story here in the book of Numbers. So, in this story, God was angry that this guy, I guess this guy Balaam, that's what the name Balaam, he was riding along on his donkey, accompanied by his two servants, and I guess God, for some reason, didn't like that he was riding on his donkey, so the Lord gets in the way of Balaam as he's riding along. So when the donkey sees God standing in the road holding a sword, the donkey leaves the road and turns into the fields. In turn, this guy Balaam ends up beating the donkey and brings it back onto the road. So he beats the crap out of the donkey, I guess with his cane. Then the angel stood where the road narrowed between two vineyards and had a stone wall on each side. When the donkey saw the angel, it moved over against the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against it. Again, Balaam beat the crap out of the donkey. Once more, the angel moved ahead. He stood in a narrow place where there was no room at all to pass on either side. This time, when the donkey saw the angel, it lay down. Balaam lost his temper and began to beat the donkey with his stick. Then the Lord gave the donkey the power of speech, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you? Why have you beaten me these 3 times?" It's a bizarre story. A talking donkey all upset about being beaten by Balaam. Balaam answers, "Because you have made a fool of me. If I had a sword, I would kill you." So Balaam really mad at this donkey. The donkey replies, "Am I not the same donkey on which you have ridden all your life? Have I ever treated you like this before?" And Balaam thinks about it for a second. He goes, "No, I guess you haven't." Then the Lord let Balaam see the angel standing there with his sword, and Balaam threw himself face downward on the ground. The angel demanded, "Why have you beaten your donkey 3 times like this?" "I have come to bar your way, because you should not be making this journey. But your donkey saw me and turned aside 3 times. If it hadn't, I would have killed you and spared the donkey." Balaam replied, "I have sinned. I did not know that you were standing in the road to oppose me, but now if you think it is wrong for me to go on, I will return home." But the angel said, "Go on with these men, but say only what I tell you to say." So Balaam went on with them. A weird story told in sort of characteristically endemic, kind of oddly translated biblical text where the story kind of only makes half sense. A few inexplicable things about the story. Number one, why did the donkey see the angel, but Balaam didn't. And I guess the moral of the story is trust your donkey. Certainly trust God. But, if your donkey's been loyal to you your whole life and it's always done right by you, and then suddenly one day it does one bad thing, give it the benefit of the doubt. Don't assume it's being bad because it's being bad. It might be being bad because it's actually trying to protect you. So, if you have a donkey and you're going to beat the crap out of it, make sure you have a really good reason for it. Okay. We get a few other odd stories here in Numbers. There are some very odd rules across Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy about women, adultery, and water. Now, here's one of the rules in the book of Numbers. If a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him so that another man has sexual relations with her, and this is hidden from her husband, the priest shall take holy water in a clay jar, put some dust from the tabernacle floor into the water. Then the priest shall say to her, "May this water that brings a curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells and your womb miscarries." This is a very odd story here in the book of Numbers. If a woman cheats on her husband and another guy has sex with her, she obviously was now going to run the risk of being pregnant. So the priest's strategy, I guess, is not to tell her husband. It's to actually kind of help her cover her tracks here. But apparently the priest is thinking that, like, if you drink water that has a bunch of dust from the floor in it, that water will taste so putrid that it will upset your stomach and I guess cause you to miscarry. This sort of biblical version of Plan B here. The morning after pill. And I guess as long as you miscarry, then whoever has to tell your husband that you cheated on him. It's Numbers 5. Another theme, very pervasive here across Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, is, God really, really trying to uphold some of these rules that endure. The Sabbath is very, very, very holy. Don't do anything on Sunday. Very consistent here. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp." So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Brutal stuff. More stonings. They're very into stoning here in Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And I guess if you, do stuff on the Sabbath, you're going to get stoned. That's just how it goes. Another very eyebrow-raising passage here in the book of Numbers is this story. This is Numbers 25. In this story, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ends up basically killing an interracial couple. Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman into his family. Because it's another tribe. In the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the Israelites. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he got up and left the congregation. Taking a spear in his hand, he went after the Israelite man in his tent and pierced the two of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. So the plague was stopped among the people of Israel. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by manifesting such zeal among them on my behalf, that in my jealousy I did not consume the Israelites. Therefore say, I hereby grant him my covenant of peace. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the Israelites. So again, this is like a very, very, very jealous version of God. He's he cares a lot about this covenant with the Israelites, and he does not want Israelite blood getting all intertwined with the blood of other tribes. Enough that when this guy gets so angry that his there was an interracial couple, like an Israelite and a non-Israelite. He got so angry about this, he killed he killed the guy. This was like deemed a good thing, I guess. So it's just a lot in these passages that is, well, it's certainly could be viewed as out of context with contemporary values, let's say. Now, if you understand the historical context of what was going on here and how the tribe of Israel ultimately became strong enough to be as successful as it was, I guess it makes sense. But there's a reason these books are so highly rated by people historically, because they just feel really out of context with the God of the New Testament. And there's just a lot of things in them that, frankly, are hard to defend in a contemporary context. Okay, I want to quickly tackle the final book of the Pentateuch here, which is the book of Deuteronomy, which is not a really complicated book, because in a lot of respects it's kind of a wrap-up of the other books here in the Pentateuch. But it is an important capstone to the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and essentially tells the story of the end of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. And so, we will cap the book of Deuteronomy here in just a second, but I want to pause here for just a moment again for station identification.
Hey everyone, Buquefius here. Thanks for tuning in to Land Speculation on YouTube. We enjoy a robust, open conversation, but we also ask that you be respectful. Don't attack people. All opinions are welcome here. Enjoy the rest of the show.
All right, guys, welcome back to Land Speculation here on YouTube. We are talking our way through the final book of the Pentateuch. I guess today we're doing 3 books of the Bible, and of course we have picked up the pace here a little bit because these are challenging and sort of dry books. They're very interesting books, but they don't have a lot of storytelling, and they're hard to reconcile against a modern context. But we got to do them because they are part of the Bible, and they are a bridge between the books of Genesis and Exodus and the excitement of the tribe of Israel's conquest of the Promised Land, which is coming up here as we get into the 6th book of the Bible, which will be the next one that we'll do on our next Bible stream. But we are now arriving here on book 5, which is the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is one of these books that essentially is kind of a capstone. In the book of Deuteronomy here, Moses basically gives the Israelites instructions for how to love and obey God in the Promised Land. This is kind of like setting them up for their final emergence out of their 40 years of wandering, and recaps a lot of the laws that are given in the books of Exodus through Numbers. This book also includes Moses' farewell address to the Israelites. So Moses, who's been basically in charge here since the beginning of the book of Exodus, he's gonna die pretty soon. Moses only lives to 120, which is a lot less life than like Methuselah or a lot of the characters in the book of Genesis. But again, we think those ages were more allegorical. I don't know how long Moses actually lived, but I would be surprised if it was actually 120. But he's going to die pretty soon, and so he's got to basically give a farewell address to the Israelites. And he's got to reiterate the covenant that God has established at Sinai. And he's going to remind the Israelites to be obedient to God's commands as they prepare to enter the promised land. So in the book of Deuteronomy here, Moses recounts the Israelites' journey. He reiterates the law, and he emphasizes the importance of covenant fidelity. He urges obedience. He warns against idolatry. If there's anything we've learned that God does not like, it's idolatry. No golden calves. God also really doesn't like disobedience for any of his commands. Just, do not disobey. God also, he also outlines blessings for faithfulness, so you got to have some rewards, and curses for disobedience. Deuteronomy is also where we learn who's going to succeed Moses, the appointment of Joshua, who becomes a successor to Moses. And ultimately, Moses dies. Joshua assumes leadership, and we kind of cue things up for the great arrival back in Canaan, which, if you recall, Abraham started out in Canaan. The last several hundred years could have been avoided here, I guess, if Abraham had just never left Canaan. But he was compelled to go to Egypt back in the day. And so here they've been stuck in Egypt, enslaved for 400 years, and now wandering the desert for another 40. What a saga here of the people of Israel. But it's about to get better, or so we think, because the Promised Land is right on the horizon here as we kind of march our way toward about the year 1400, which is the period when everything is going to change for them. 1406 is the year that Moses dies and Joshua takes over. But in the meantime, here for the everything that transpires here in the book of Deuteronomy, we're still stuck in the desert. So, the context still very, very, very sandy. Now, after 1406, the Israelites are going to surge on Canaan, finally prepared, I guess, with an adequate regimen of obedience and a covenant with God. And between 1406 and 1399, they're going to go conquest Canaan. But, again, the wilderness wanderings continue on for now. So one of the interesting things that happens in the book of Deuteronomy right at the outset is God basically reiterates the Ten Commandments. And I guess this is something that underscores how important this is. A lot of people don't realize that the Ten Commandments shows up twice in the Bible. It shows up in the book of Exodus, and then it shows up here again in the book of Deuteronomy in a little bit different language. Moses called together all the people of Israel and said to them, "People of Israel, listen to all the laws that I'm giving you today. Learn them and be sure that you obey them. At Mount Sinai, the Lord our God made a covenant not only with our fathers, but with all of us who are living today. There on the mountain, the Lord spoke to you face to face from the fire. I stood between you and the Lord at that time to tell you what he said, because you were afraid of the fire and would not go up to the mountain." I don't know if that's exactly how it was told back in Genesis, but Moses, I don't know, is he gaslighting the people a little bit here? He's saying, I had the courage to go up the mountain, but you didn't. The Lord said, "I am the Lord your God, who rescued you from Egypt, where you were slaves. Worship no God but me. Do not make for yourselves images of anything in heaven or on earth, or in the water or under the earth. Do not bow down to any idol or worship it, for I am the Lord your God, and I tolerate no rivals. I bring punishment on those who hate me, and on their descendants down to the third and fourth generation. But I show love to the thousands of generations of those who love me and obey my laws. Do not use my name for evil purposes. For I, the Lord your God, will punish anyone who misuses my name. Observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. As I, the Lord your God, have commanded you, you have 6 days in which to do your work, but the 7th day is a day of rest, dedicated to me. On that day no one is to work, neither you, nor your children, your slaves, your animals, nor the foreigners who live in your country. Your slaves must rest just as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that I, the Lord your God, rescued you by my great power and strength. That is why I command you to observe the Sabbath. Respect your father and your mother, as I, the Lord your God, command you, so that all may go well with you, and so that you may live a long time in the land I am giving you. Do not commit murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not accuse anyone falsely. Do not desire another man's wife. Do not desire his house, his land, his slaves, his cattle, his donkeys, or anything else that he owns. These are the commandments the Lord gave all of you when you were gathered at the mountain, when he spoke with a mighty voice from the fire and from the thick clouds. He gave these commandments and no others. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. Now we know Moses had broken the tablets because he came back and he saw the people were worshiping the false idols, and he broke the tablets and he had to go back and make them again. Maybe there were additional commandments. He's a little defensive of, there were no others. These are the 10. These are the 10 commandments. It's kind of an odd thing. He says these are the 10 commandments, but there are all these other rules which God has passed down to Moses and to Aaron. We've got 3 whole books of the Bible which are basically devoted to rules. So it is a little weird for Moses to be so picky about the fact that these are the 10. These are the 10 rules that trump all the others. The 10 commandments. In a way, the text there in Deuteronomy is kind of more beautiful text of the 10 commandments than the text in Exodus, but I guess that's a matter of taste. So, that's a thing. This is a very brutal God here. And God, over the course of Deuteronomy, reinforces a number of the rules that he has reinforced. Or that he reinforced a number of the rules that he put forward in Leviticus and Numbers. Of course, one of which is God is your God. There aren't any other gods. Don't worship any other gods. If your very own brother, or your son or your daughter, or the wife you love, or your closest friend secretly entices you, saying, "Let us go and worship other gods," as they sometimes do. I've had friends, give me the little elbow. It's like, hey, you wanna, go worship some other gods. It is enticing. It is enticing, but gods, the people around you, whether near or far, do not yield to them or listen to them. Show them no pity. There's no excuse for this. Do not spare them or shield them. You must certainly put them to death. Your hand must be the first in putting them to death, and then the hands of all the people. Stone them to death, because they tried to turn away from the Lord your God. God is unequivocal about this. Golden calves, other gods, don't do it. It doesn't matter how tempting it is. Don't do it. It's a book of the Bible, so of course God is going to reinforce circumcision as his utmost covenant. In Deuteronomy 10, he reminds people not just to circumcise their bodies, but circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. Deuteronomy 10. All right, another rule here in Deuteronomy. This is where it gets kind of interesting. Apparently, you're supposed to, like, if your brother dies, you're supposed to, like, it's like a very noble thing. In fact, you have to do it. Is impregnate his wife. If a man died childless, his brother had to impregnate the widow. If the brother-in-law refused, this happens, and I guess this is punishment. Yeah, I mean, this is like another sort of epidemiological thing. Kids are very important. Kids are labor. Kids carry on the family name. There's a lot of importance to having kids. And so if you die without having given your spouse children, you know, it's on your brother. It's on your brother's now got this responsibility to go and, like, you know, pork your wife. It's odd. It's odd, but like there is sort of there's a societal reason why this would have happened, but there's things that's kind of odd to people. You know, lest you thought that the rules earlier on about parenting were a little strict. God is not letting up here at all. Death to unruly teenagers. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his mother and father, and will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of the town. They shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Like that kid, he's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all of the men of his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. Deuteronomy 21. So, you know, if your kid's a little bit of a fuck off, you know, you got to get the town elders to stone him to death. If a drunkard, a glutton, won't obey you, it's just what you got to do. What you got to do. Oh, okay. Let's see. What do we have now? Death. More death. More death prescriptions here to girls who are found to have broken hymens on their wedding night. All right, Deuteronomy 22. If, however, the charge is true and no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her town shall stone her to death. She has done an outrageous thing in Israel by being promiscuous while still in her father's house. You must purge the evil from among you. So, premarital sex, bad enough that you should be stoned to death for doing it. So, like, we're talking about very, very, very strict society going on here. And then Deuteronomy also gets a little weird. There's a real fixation on testicles here in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 25. When two men are fighting, and the wife of one of them intervenes to drag her husband clear of his opponent. So I guess two guys are fighting. One of their wives steps in and I guess tries to drag the one that she's married to away. If she puts her hand and catches hold of the man by his privates, you must cut off her hand and show her no mercy. I can only imagine the things that were actually happening here in Israelite society here as they wandered the desert, that this specific line had to get added as a rule laid down by God. You know, two guys fighting, one of their wives steps in, she grabs him by the nuts and tries to pull him away. that she is supposed to be stoned to death. No, you're supposed to cut off her hand. I guess she can live, but you got to cut off her hand. Show her no mercy. Deuteronomy also goes on, though. No man whose testicles have been crushed or whose organ has been cut off may become a member of the assembly of God. Deuteronomy 23. And again, I would guess that this has to do, this is sort of another epidemiological thing. Grow the tribe, spread the faith. If you physically don't have the parts in order to be able to help spread the faith, then you don't get to be part of the fun little group. Some of these rules get very arcane, very detailed, and you wonder what was going on. That because you have in the judiciary, you have this the law, sort of it evolves sort of in the way that the judges interpret the law. This sort of body of precedent, case law. When the Supreme Court makes a decision, they're often interpreting prior decisions to try to figure out sort of what's the actual sweet spot here on the law. Well, the case law that's emerging here in Deuteronomy involves a lot of stories that get very, very, very specific. And God, you'd think with all the things that God has to worry about here, having created the entire earth, that he wouldn't be quite this fixated on things of this sort. But God's getting really, really, really in the weeds here. So, lest you thought that Leviticus was the only book here in the Old Testament that gets really, really, really into the weeds, down into the sweet spot on some of these arcane rules, Deuteronomy does not take a back seat. Okay, after God lays down all these rules, he pivots. These are all still being given basically by Moses and Aaron down to the Israelites. This is sort of the lasting legacy. How to build a successful Israelite society, how to maintain a covenant with God, and how to move forward here as we prepare. The excitement is building here to enter the promised land. Moses then proceeds to die. So, Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Mount Pisgah, east of Jericho. And there the Lord showed him the whole land, the territory of Gilead as far as the town of Dan, the entire territory of Naphtali, the territories of Ephraim and Manasseh, the territory of Judah as far west as the Mediterranean Sea, the southern part of Judah, and the plain that reaches from Zoar to Jericho, the city of palm trees. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the land that I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that I would give to their descendants. I have let you see it, but I will not let you go there." God being sort of inexplicably punitive to Moses here. It's like, you've put in all this work. Like, you started out as a baby in Egypt, like talking to the Pharaoh, and you led your people out of Egypt, and then you helped guide them and establish all these arcane rules over the last 40 years. That's awesome. I'm going to reward you by taking you up to the top of this mountain after you've climbed about half a dozen other mountains, and I'm going to show it to you. But I'm not going to let you go there. I'm going to make you die before you get to actually see any of it. So Moses, the Lord's servant, died there in the land of Moab, as the Lord had said he would. The Lord buried him in a valley in Moab, opposite the town of Bethpor. But to this day, no one knows the exact place of his burial, the Bible specifies. If anybody wants to go digging for bones. Moses was 120 years old when he died. He was as strong as ever, and his eyesight was still good. It's impressive. Didn't even need glasses. The people of Israel mourned for him for 30 days in the plains of Moab. Joshua, son of Nun, like not son of none, like son of none, and not like a nun, a guy named Nun, but not like, None exists. He's just named Nun. Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with wisdom because Moses had appointed him to be his successor. The people of Israel obeyed Joshua, kept the commands that the Lord had given them through Moses. Makes sense that Joshua ends up being the next book of the Bible. It all kind of fits together, doesn't it? As the Bible says, there has never been a prophet in Israel like Moses. The Lord spoke with him face to face. No other prophet has ever done miracles and wonders like those that the Lord sent Moses to perform against the king of Egypt, his officials, and the entire country. No other prophet has been able to do the great and terrifying things that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And so, I guess on the top of the mountain there, Moses laid down and he died. And the plight of the Israelites was turned over to the successor Joshua, about yet whom we don't really know anything, just as they are on the precipice of, I guess, finally getting out of the desert. A lot of people have come and gone along the way. 440 years of slavery and wandering around. It's a long time. That's longer than the entire history of the United States, so a little bit of a rough ride there. But I guess it's all going to get fixed now. But Moses didn't get to really experience it. So that's basically where the Pentateuch ends. It was a lot. The Bible does a very good job of setting the stage, building excitement. So we have some epic stories. We've sort of figured out how the world was formed. We have kind of allegoried our way through understanding human failings, why God is so punitive, and how this dynamic is evolving between God being really hopeful and then really disappointed in human beings' shortcomings, and then punitive, and then he basically decides he needs to pick a righteous guy, so he picks Abraham, and then Abraham's descendants start to kind of become this tribe and ultimately this kingdom, but they have to get delivered out of slavery first, and then they have to end up wandering the desert because they need to go through a period here of essentially cultivation where they learn how to, be obedient. So the timeline to this point here across the first 5 books of the Bible, which we have now wandered our way through, 4,000-ish BC, if you follow the literal genealogies, the creation of the world. Around the same time, the fall of Adam and Eve, somewhere between the year 4,000 and 3,000 BC. Noah's Ark, the flood, somewhere around 2,300 BC. The year 2000 BC, the call of Abraham. God picks out Abraham. Abraham journeys to Egypt from Ur in approximately 1900 BC. God makes the covenant with Abraham around this time. 1900 BC, Abraham births Isaac, his son. In 1850, Isaac births Jacob, his son. In 1800, Jacob journeys to Haran. In 1800, God makes a covenant with Jacob. In 1770, Jacob returns to Canaan. 1740, the birth of Joseph. And then ultimately in 1526, after the Israelites have been enslaved in Egypt, is the birth of Moses. Moses delivers the Israelites out of Egypt around 1446, the Exodus, and then for 40 years they wander around. So 1446, We get the law at Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments, wilderness wanderings from 1446 to 1406. The death of Moses happens here in 1406 BC. And then, again, around the year 1400, we start to dig into the story of Joshua, which is book 6 of the Bible. We'll learn about the conquest of Canaan under Joshua and embark on about 1,000 years, or 900 or so years of history of the Israelites as they grow into a great kingdom, having been delivered on the shoulders of all the laws that Moses passed down. So, very exciting stuff here in the Bible to this point. And this is where we got to leave off here. We've covered 3 books of the Bible here. We've learned a lot of rules. We have learned about some very, very inexplicable dynamics of God. Maybe, I say inexplicable, maybe explicable, but hard to reconcile, perhaps. A very jealous God, a God that, wants to see a lot of people stoned. Like, not stoned like that. Like stoned for disobeying their parents and such. So, a lot of head scratchers in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. If you believe Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy literally, you would believe in a very exclusive, tribal God, and probably have to obey a lot of epidemiological rules that probably, in today's context, would not serve the same purpose as they did back then. And I think that's sort of an odd thing to me, like when you sort of, a lot of the practices of contemporary Judaism draw, of course, out of these 3 books, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in a way, they're obeyed because that's what God said to do in those books. And I think the reality is that God said to do those things because there was a specific societal building or epidemiological purpose to them. And when we see them practiced today, they are in effect ceremonial. So, what would God think about those things today? It's a head scratcher, it's a thinker. This is the part of the Bible that I think, to a lot of folks makes the Bible, people like to use Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy to try to discredit other aspects of Christian and Jewish belief. And there are definitely some passages in there that are really, really, really hard to justify. But there's also context for what kind of society was and how you built a society back then. So it's all very interesting. We move through these books more quickly, both because there's less storytelling, they're a little bit less highly rated, and I think it would be a little tedious for us to just walk through every single little rule and policy and whatnot. But God was very, 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 very picky about this kind of stuff. So, important for us to know, we have 12 historical books coming up in the Bible to learn about this next 900 to 1,000 years of biblical history. So, we have the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, which are historical books which walk through that history before we get into some of the fluffier stuff in the Old Testament. So we're going to think about how we're going to tackle these books. Tell the story of the judges and the kings and how the tribe of Israel evolved. I would imagine we'll probably tackle these in bunches. There's some epic stuff in some of these books, as well as some things that we could probably move through a little more quickly. So, we're making progress into the Bible here. We have completed the Pentateuch. Much more to get to. I appreciate you guys sticking with us here through our deep dives into the Bible. This is, again, Bible Stream Part 5. So, part 6 will begin with the book of Joshua. If people wouldn't mind dropping a like and a subscribe on the video, I appreciate that. Those likes help us out with YouTube. The subscribes help you guys know when we are on. As always, the description has links to our Discord, which is, you can chat about anything, but in particular, there's a religion channel if you want to talk about the Bible there. Of course, the Duck Fund is our PayPal link if you want to donate. I always appreciate the contributions there. Now, I know this is a little less engaging stream when we do these deep dives. Sometimes do a little bit less chat engagement, but I know people have been chatting all along here, and I have been reading it. I appreciate the engagement here, guys. At some point, we're going to do a Bible bracket, too, of favorite Bible characters and such, because that has been requested, and I do think it's a good idea. I mean, Moses is clearly a giant in the Bible. But at this point, how Moses compares against, say, Abraham or Jacob or Joseph, they seem a little more fallible. But certainly Abraham seems pretty righteous. Certainly Noah is pretty righteous. Noah, pretty crazy. You build a giant boat just because God told you to. Everyone's laughing at you, and then you turn out to save the world. That's a pretty important thing. So, I don't know. Maybe we should do a little poll here, guys. This Bible figure so far. Let's do Adam. Let's do Noah. I'm going to ask you guys who you think is your favorite Bible figure so far. And while people are mulling the question here, I guess I owe a thank you to our mods. I guess Jeanette has been doing most of the heavy lifting here tonight, so we certainly appreciate that. And, as always, I appreciate the conversation from you guys. If anybody wants to reach out directly to me with any thoughts or commentary, of course, landspeculation@gmail.com is the email address. Ryan says, looking forward to this when I have time. Yeah, Ryan, I mean, these Bible streams are designed to be ones that you can definitely listen to after the fact, and they will still make good sense, I hope. Because these are designed to be sort of narrative listens as opposed to interactive chats. So, yeah, I know a lot of people have told me they kind of coming back and listening to these almost as ASMR. So, feel free. I got a few votes in here, but please keep voting. If inclined. So far, the voting is partial to Noah, but we'll leave this up for a bit. All right, guys. It's late. We started a little late. But lots of good stuff here. So anyway, I appreciate the engagement here. I hope it was all interesting and such. Ryan's saying the graph of the stories here is this sort of map of the Bible is very helpful. Yeah, if you missed our first Bible stream, we did sort of a broad overview of how the Bible is organized, and generally, it's actually like really well organized. Like there's a lot of curation that went into deciding how the Bible is organized. I always sort of felt like when I was first learning the Bible that it was a big jumbled mess outside of a few different books, but actually it is very intentionally organized and very thoughtfully organized. Skitty, yep, appreciate it. I'm lurking, appreciate it. So, 2.5 hours, yes, Timmy. That's how we roll here on Land Speculation. I don't know how you guys do it. Like, I just felt like listening to a professor ramble on for an hour was like a lot. You guys are listening to me for 2.5 hours. That's like way worse. But I appreciate it. Appreciate you guys sticking around for it. The average view duration on this video is about 18 minutes, which we have like very strong, usually very strong average view duration, which I guess means people are, the people who are engaged stay engaged. So that's good stuff. Good stuff. I have a better voice than most professors. You see, YouTube took down one of our videos for spreading conspiracy theories. I got like a very serious email from YouTube that I shouldn't be spreading dangerous conspiracy theories, and for the health and safety of our viewers, YouTube went ahead and took down our video and deleted it forever. But before they deleted it forever, they let me go back and look at the passage of the video where I was spreading the dangerous conspiracy theories, and they even gave me a timestamp. And I kid you not that the passage that YouTube claimed was a dangerous conspiracy theory that we were spreading was 50 seconds into a video back from 2020 when we were walking around outside, and I was walking by a mailbox, and I believe it was Internet God was on the stream at the time, probably the only person watching in that moment, and he must have posted something, and I made a facetious comment about how Nazis must not like mailboxes. And YouTube decided that that was spreading a conspiracy theory. Go figure. Now I've mentioned it on this stream, so we'll see if YouTube also flags this stream. I was floored, Skitty. Like, of all the serious topics we have ever talked about on these streams, like the thing that YouTube flags is that. It was quite interesting. Do a deep dive into the sentiments of that particular body of political thought in relation to the Postal Service. Yes, I did snip the clip. And it's on Discord. If you think I am exaggerating or mischaracterizing it in some way. But thou shalt not insinuate that that particular political group as a vendetta against the male. For some reason, I don't know who that conspiracy would be damaging to. Even if that were something that was uttered in any seriousness, even if that was a broadly held theory, why would that be dangerous to anyone in any way? I don't know. But it's the fact that I don't know which is why YouTube has to be looking out for you guys. So, appreciate that you guys, we all appreciate YouTube working so hard to protect you guys from me. So, send them a thank you note. Not super surprising that this was done, because we also had another video taken down by YouTube for also apparently spreading quote unquote misinformation about the vaccines. That video was published in July of 2020, 6 months before any of the vaccines even came out. And it does not mention vaccines a single time. So, it can be frustrating at times, but these are things well beyond my pay grade that YouTube knows that I don't. Yes. Be careful. Be careful of your mail. Before you stick your hand in there, when you open the mailbox, just it's smart to take a little peek first, just to make sure no little Hitlers running around in your mailbox. You stick your hand in there, and then suddenly Hitler's in there with like a little machete, chopping off fingers. Be careful. We might have to retroactively cut out this whole segment of the video just to protect ourselves. Anyway, guys, I'm rambling. It's late. We're going to wrap up here for the evening. I appreciate all of the engagement with the stream here tonight, as well as all the engagement generally. Tell your friends, and don't be strangers. So, that's about it, guys. Did we pick a winner? Who's our winner if we didn't? Somebody won, maybe. Maybe there are no winners. Timmy Two Shoe. Timmy Two Shoe is our winner tonight. Congratulations to Timmy Two Shoe. Excellent job. Very good, Timmy. Well earned. Well earned, I think. So, enjoy your victory. Thanks, Jeanette, for modding. Thanks, you guys, for the conversation. Don't be strangers. But I got to do some things, so for now, and in general, this is Land. That ain't just speculation, and I hope you guys have a good night.